We always talk about the big AI players, the usual suspects.
Right.
But today, we're heading to Africa,
Okay.
specifically Kenya. They have this, it's kind of a bold vision
Yeah.
to become like the central AI hub for the whole continent.
And then
Super ambitious. And to really kick things off, they released this, a comprehensive AI strategy back in March, covering 2025 to 2030. So that's what we're diving into today.
Looking forward to it.
It's dense. There's a lot to unpack.
For sure.
But we're gonna make it, as clear and interesting as possible for everyone listening.
Absolutely.
So first things first, what is Kenya trying to achieve with this whole thing? What's the big picture here?
Well, at the heart of it, it's about using AI as this engine, right?
Okay.
To drive real progress. And they're not just talking about, any kind of progress.
Right.
It's about sustainable development, boosting economic growth,
Yeah.
and making sure everyone benefits. So social inclusion is a huge part of it. But, and this is key, they're not naive about the potential downsides.
Right, the risks.
Exactly. So they're also putting a lot of emphasis on protecting Kenya's own interests,
Makes sense.
like data sovereignty, making sure their data stays under their control, strong cybersecurity, and really clear ethical guidelines for AI development and use.
Got to be both, right? The opportunities and that careful approach.
Yeah, finding that balance.
Now, this strategy is massive, and I'm guessing it wasn't just like thrown together overnight, right? What went into creating it?
Oh, no, not at all. This was a very deliberate, thorough process. They
Right.
did their homework, that's for sure. So they started by really digging into all the existing research,
Okay.
looking at the global AI scene, what's happening in Africa, all of that. Then they did a deep dive into their own environment, the social landscape, the economy, the tech they have available, the political climate, even the legal stuff, everything. And most importantly, they didn't just sit in a room and make assumptions. They went out and talked to people.
Oh, interesting.
They did tons of interviews with experts in government, in businesses, universities.
So getting those firsthand perspectives.
Exactly. Plus, they held focus groups. They had these big town hall meetings, even online surveys.
So trying to capture a really broad range of views.
That's the idea. And
Yeah.
this stakeholder engagement, it wasn't just a one-time thing. They kept people in the loop throughout the whole process.
That makes sense.
So it wasn't just, here's our strategy, deal with it. It was much more collaborative.
So why now, right? Why this big push for an AI strategy at this particular moment? What's Kenya trying to get ahead of?
Right. So they're very upfront about the why in the strategy document itself.
Correct.
And, one of the biggest things is the potential impact on jobs.
That makes sense. AI and automation and...
It's a global concern, right?
Yeah.
But it's especially relevant in Kenya, where they have a very young population. Lots of people entering the workforce. And they're worried about jobs being displaced,
Right.
particularly in manufacturing, agriculture, services.
Yeah.
So they want to figure out how to manage that transition proactively.
Okay, so jobs. What else?
Another big worry is what they call the digital divide. Basically, will everyone benefit from AI equally?
Ah, right.
Or will it just make the gap between the haves and have-nots even bigger?
Yeah.
Urban versus rural, richer versus poorer communities.
It's that access issue.
Exactly. They're really committed to making this an inclusive development.
I see.
So AI empowers everyone, not just a select few.
So jobs, inclusion, and then I'm assuming all the stuff around data.
Oh, absolutely. Data is at the heart of AI, and that brings up a whole bunch of issues.
Like what?
Well, data sovereignty is a big one. Basically, who controls the data?
Right.
With AI, you need huge data sets, and they're very aware of the potential for misuse, for exploitation, even what some call data colonialism, where big international companies come in, take their data, and use it for their own benefit.
Right. Not necessarily Kenya's benefit.
Exactly. So they're very, very conscious of that.
Those are some pretty weighty issues. Is there anything beyond just the economic and data aspects?
Oh, yeah, definitely. They spend a lot of time in the strategy talking about the ethical side of AI.
Okay.
And there are lots of concerns there, right? Like, algorithms can be biased. They can actually amplify existing discrimination.
Right, if they're trained on biased data.
Exactly. And there's also the potential for AI to be used for surveillance, to erode people's privacy and rights.
Okay, that's a big one.
So building trust in AI, making sure it aligns with Kenyan values, and protecting human rights.
Yeah.
That's a huge priority for them.
So it's not just about avoiding problems, right? There must be strategic advantages to this as well.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They see this as a chance to really position Kenya.
Okay, how so?
Well, they want to be seen as this hub for homegrown tech, for innovation
Hmm.
that could attract a lot of investment, both from within Kenya and internationally. And it's not just about the money, right? It's about building up local expertise,
Yeah.
creating AI solutions that are tailored to Kenya's specific needs.
I see.
So using local data, training local talent, and making sure the technology aligns with their culture and their priorities.
That makes sense.
Because, let's face it, AI developed in Silicon Valley might not be the best fit for the challenges facing a farmer in rural Kenya.
Totally. So they have the why and the potential benefits. Now let's talk about the what. What does Kenya's AI landscape actually look like right now? Where are they starting from?
Okay, so they're not starting from scratch, that's for sure. They have some really solid foundations to build on.
Like what?
Well, Kenya is already known as this tech and innovation hub for Africa. They
Okay.
have a young, digitally savvy population, people who are generally really open to new technologies.
Right.
They also have this really vibrant startup ecosystem, which is attracting investment, including in AI. And even their more established companies, like in telecoms and banking.
Right.
They're already using AI to improve their services and their operations.
So there's already some activity happening.
Definitely. And there are some areas where Kenya is really leading the way.
Oh, like what?
Well, they're pioneers in mobile money, right?
Right. M-Pesa and all that.
Exactly. And that's driven a lot of research and innovation in how to use AI, specifically machine learning, for financial inclusion,
Right.
how to reach people who don't have access to traditional banking.
Makes sense.
Another thing is that global tech companies are actually setting up research centers in Kenya.
Interesting. Why they're there?
Well, they see the potential, right? They're particularly focused on AI in healthcare and agriculture, which are obviously huge sectors in Kenya.
Right.
And one more thing I think is really important. There's a growing community of researchers in Kenya itself who are studying the impact of AI on society.
Okay.
And they're working on ethical guidelines that are specific to the Kenyan context.
So it's not just about the tech, it's about the responsible development of the tech.
Exactly. So they're already having those conversations, which is a really good sign.
As we dig deeper into this strategy, I think it'd be helpful to define some of the key terms.
Yeah, good idea.
What are some of the basic concepts they lay out?
So they have a whole glossary in the strategy document, but
Okay.
it's super helpful. And they start with the basics, like defining artificial intelligence itself.
Okay, so how do they define it?
Well, they say it's essentially machines doing things that we normally think of as requiring human intelligence, like learning, problem solving, making decisions.
Right.
Then they define machine learning, which is like a subset of AI,
Okay.
where systems learn from experience, they get better at a task without being specifically programmed for every single step.
Right, so they adapt and learn.
Exactly. And then there are neural networks, which are like computational models inspired by the human brain.
Okay.
Those are really good at recognizing patterns, complex patterns.
So those are kind of the building blocks.
Yeah.
What about some of the more, advanced terms we hear a lot these days?
They cover those too. So large language models are AI systems trained on massive amounts of text data,
Mm-hmm.
which means they can understand and generate human-like text, like what we're seeing with ChatGPT and all that.
Right, right.
Then there's generative AI, which is a whole category of models that can create new content.
Right.
Not just text, but images, music, even code.
Wow.
And since there are concerns about, how accurate this generated content is.
Yeah, is it real, is it fake?
Exactly. They define retrieval augmented generation. It's basically combining information retrieval with generative AI.
Okay.
So the AI can pull in reliable information to back up what it's generating.
Oh, so it's not just making stuff up.
Hopefully not. And then on the other end of the spectrum, they have small language models, which are designed to run on devices with less power, so they're more efficient.
Okay, more accessible, maybe?
Yeah. Potentially, yeah. And they also define algorithms, which are basically the sets of rules that computers follow.
Right.
Edge computing, which is about processing data closer to where it's collected.
Okay.
And, super importantly, data privacy, which is all about protecting people's rights regarding their personal information.
Right. That's a huge one these days.
Absolutely. They also have a definition for artificial intelligence governance.
Okay, so what's their take on that?
It's basically the whole framework, right? The policies, the guidelines, the practices that make sure AI is developed and used responsibly, ethically, and transparently.
So it's about having those safeguards in place.
Exactly. They talk about oversight mechanism, risk management, accountability.
Okay.
So it's clear they're taking that aspect very seriously.
So let's step back a bit and look at the bigger picture they painted. What did their environmental analysis reveal about the global, regional, and national context surrounding this strategy?
Right, so they did a very thorough analysis looking at different levels. Globally, they acknowledge that the US and China are the current leaders in AI.
Right.
There's so much investment pouring into those regions. They point to things like the booming market for GPUs, the specialized chips used for AI,
Mm-hmm.
and the huge amounts companies like Microsoft are spending on AI.
Right.
They also highlight the rapid progress in generative AI and its potential economic impact,
Okay.
talking about trillions of dollars being added to the global economy.
Wow.
And they're very aware of the potential for AI to transform labor markets.
All right. We talked about the jobs issue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But importantly, they also point out the growing global concern about the ethics of AI and the fact that not many countries are really addressing AI safety head on.
Okay, so those are the global trends. What about closer to home, regionally in Africa?
Right. So regionally, they acknowledge the economic challenges that many African countries are facing,
Right.
but they're also optimistic about the potential for recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And they see AI as a key driver of economic growth for the continent.
Yeah.
With projections suggesting trillions of dollars could be added to Africa's GDP by 2030 because of AI.
So there's a sense of opportunity there.
Definitely. They also highlight some of the Pan-African AI initiatives that are already underway.
Oh, like what?
Well, there's Masakane, which is focused on developing natural language processing for African languages,
Okay.
which is a huge challenge because most AI models are trained on English or Chinese data.
Right. It needs to be adapted to local context.
Exactly. And then there's the Lacuna Fund, which supports the creation of labeled data sets for African languages.
So basically the raw material that AI needs to learn.
Exactly. So those are some positive signs at the regional level.
Okay, so global trends, regional initiatives. What about the situation on the ground in Kenya itself?
Well, nationally, they've made good progress on building out their digital infrastructure.
Okay.
They've been expanding fiber optic networks, mobile network operators are investing, they're setting up data centers, and more people are using cloud computing services.
So the foundation is being laid.
Yeah, they're getting there. They also highlight the strength of their tech and developer communities and the fact that there's already AI research happening in universities and in the private sector.
So there's a talent pool to draw on.
Exactly. And again, they mention their leadership in mobile money and all the research that's come out of
Right, so that's a real strength for them.
Definitely.
Now, what about the political side of things? What did their analysis reveal there?
Well, globally, they recognize that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to AI governance.
Okay.
You know, the EU is doing its own thing, the UK has a different approach, the US is another story.
Right, so it's fragmented.
Yeah, there's no global consensus yet. But there is a growing movement towards ethical AI frameworks led by organizations like the OECD, UNESCO, and the African Union.
Right, trying to set some global standards.
Exactly. Regionally, they point out that the East African community has some frameworks in place that could help with harmonizing AI regulations in the future.
So, potential for collaboration there.
Yeah. Within Kenya itself, the report really emphasizes the strong political will behind this AI strategy.
Okay.
They point to the National Digital Economy Blueprint and the Kenya National Digital Master Plan as evidence of that.
So it's not just talk, there's action behind it.
Exactly. And they specifically mention Konza Technopolis.
Okay, what's that?
It's this planned city, a smart city they're building.
Oh, interesting.
And it's going to be a major hub for technology and innovation, including AI.
So they're really putting their money where their mouth is.
Yeah, seems so.
Let's get specific now.
Yeah.
What about the legal and regulatory environment? What's the situation there, both globally and within Kenya?
Okay, so globally, they point out that there's been a huge increase in AI-related laws and regulations. It's a hot topic everywhere. They mention the EU AI Act, which takes this risk-based approach, classifying AI systems based on their potential risk and regulating them accordingly.
So different levels of scrutiny.
Exactly. They also talk about the U.S. executive order on AI and the U.K.'s focus on AI safety.
So different approaches emerging.
Yeah, everyone's trying to figure out the best way forward. Regionally, they highlight the African Union's Continental AI Strategy, which is a blueprint for how African countries can approach AI regulation. It emphasizes things like industry codes of conduct, and technical standards.
So more of a collaborative approach.
Yeah, setting guidelines and best practices. And they also point to countries like Egypt and Rwanda
Okay.
that have already developed national AI strategies.
So Kenya isn't alone in this.
No, not at all. When it comes to Kenya specifically, they're very upfront about the fact that they don't have AI-specific laws yet.
Okay, so they're playing catch up.
In a way, yeah. But they do have some foundational laws, like the Data Protection Act, that are relevant.
Right, so there's something to build on.
Exactly. And they also mention some past efforts, like a task force report from 2019 and a draft bill on robotics and AI from 2023.
Okay.
But those haven't really translated into comprehensive legislation yet.
So it's a work in progress. It seems like Kenya is still in the early stages of developing that regulatory structure for AI. How did their AI readiness assessment reflect this?
Oh, right. So they use some established indices from UNESCO and Oxford Insights to assess their readiness. And the good news is they got some points for having those foundational legal frameworks in place, like the Data Protection Act.
Okay, so that's a plus.
Yeah, but they also identified some areas where they need to improve.
Like what?
Well, data availability and quality is a big one.
Right.
They need more high-quality data that's accessible for AI development. Another issue is the lack of diversity in the AI field. They need to get more women and minorities involved.
Absolutely.
And they also need to raise public awareness about AI in general.
So people understand the implications, the opportunities, the risks?
Exactly. When it comes to infrastructure, there's room for improvement.
Okay.
They need to invest more, particularly in computing power and reliable broadband access.
Those are essential for AI development.
Definitely. But on the positive side, the assessment did acknowledge the efforts being made to improve regulatory preparedness. There's a lot of collaboration going on between different stakeholders.
So they're working on it.
Yeah, they're moving in the right direction.
Now, this strategy is unique because they went beyond just looking at existing research.
Right.
They did their own data collection, talking to people on the ground.
Yeah, they really wanted to get those firsthand insights.
So what were some of the key things they learned from those interviews, focus groups, and surveys?
Okay, so there were a lot of positives. People highlighted Kenya's vibrant startup scene, the growing digital literacy across the population, their good access to renewable energy, which is important for powering data centers.
Right, sustainability.
Exactly. And a general willingness to embrace innovation.
So, fertile ground for AI.
Yeah, it seems so. They also found that a good number of Kenyans have already received some AI training.
Oh, wow. So they're ahead of the curve in some ways.
In a way, yeah. But there were also some challenges that came up repeatedly.
Like what?
Well, the lack of access to high-quality data was a big one.
Okay.
Especially data that's relevant to the Kenyan context.
Right. You can't just use data from somewhere else.
Exactly. Infrastructure gaps were also a recurring theme.
Okay.
Computing power, broadband access, those are still issues. And there was some mistrust of AI.
Interesting.
Concerns about job displacement, bias, all the things we talked about earlier.
Right. So they need to build trust.
Definitely. They also found that coordination among international donors could be better.
Okay.
And there's this perception of a power imbalance between Kenya and big tech companies.
Right. The data colonialism concern again.
Exactly. Another interesting finding was that many Kenyans working in AI are in junior roles.
Okay.
They need more people in leadership positions driving the strategy.
Right. Building that expertise locally.
Exactly. And access to capital for small and medium-sized enterprises is still a barrier.
So even if they have great ideas, it's hard to get them off the ground.
Yeah. And energy poverty in certain areas was also mentioned.
So those are some of the practical challenges.
Yeah. The report also included a lot of recommendations from the people they talked to.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
Well, they stressed the need for an inclusive national strategy with built-in ethical safeguards.
Okay, so thinking about those issues from the start.
Exactly. They also called for more interdisciplinary collaborations, bringing together people from different fields to work on AI solutions, and they really emphasized the need to develop more local data sets.
Right, so the AI is trained on Kenyan data, reflecting Kenyan realities.
Exactly. They also want more transparency in funding, who's paying for what, and what are their interests.
Right, avoiding those power imbalances.
Yeah. They also want clear responsibilities for AI deployment,
So who's accountable if something goes wrong?
Exactly. And they even talked about establishing platforms for testing AI systems, specifically in the Kenyan context.
Oh, interesting.
Because what works in one country might not work in another.
Right, different challenges, different priorities.
Exactly. They also want to define AI safety from a global south perspective,
Okay.
recognizing that the risks and concerns might be different in developing countries.
Right, it's not a one-size-fits-all thing.
Definitely not.
So they talked to all these different people. What about their stakeholder analysis? Who did they identify as the key players in Kenya's AI ecosystem?
Right. So they used some established theories to analyze the stakeholders,
Okay.
and they identified several key groups, like the government at different levels,
Okay.
the private sector, including businesses of all sizes,
Right.
citizens, obviously, regulatory agencies, academia, researchers, investors, both local and international,
Yep.
and local communities.
So a pretty comprehensive list.
Yeah, they wanted to map out the whole ecosystem, and they
Mm.
found that these stakeholders have different levels of interest and influence.
Right, some are more active than others.
Exactly. And they emphasize that for the strategy to be successful, you need to get the most important stakeholders on board.
Okay, so who did they highlight?
They specifically mention AI developers, obviously.
Right, the people building the tech.
Exactly.
Mhm.
But also local communities, the people who will be affected by AI.
So getting their input from the start.
Yeah, it's about making sure the technology serves their needs.
Makes sense.
They also highlighted regulatory agencies, researchers, and investors.
Okay, so kind of a balance between the technical side and the policy and funding side.
Exactly.
Now, to kind of wrap up this environmental analysis, they provide what they call a SLOC summary.
Right. Strengths, limitations, opportunities, and challenges.
Can you give us a quick rundown of what they found in each of those areas?
Sure. So in terms of strengths, they point to the legal frameworks they already have in place.
Okay.
Even if they're not AI specific, they provide a foundation. They also highlight the government's commitment to emerging technologies. The fact that they've been successful in attracting funding from international partners and the existing AI initiatives that are already happening in the public sector.
So they're not starting from zero.
Exactly. And they see Kenya's status as a regional tech hub as a big plus.
Okay, so those are the positives. What are the limitations?
Well, the obvious one is the lack of comprehensive AI-specific regulation.
Right.
They're working on it, but it's not there yet. And there's some fragmentation in the regulatory landscape.
Okay.
Different sectors have different rules, which can be confusing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Data quality and accessibility is still an issue.
Okay.
And there are infrastructure constraints, particularly in computing power, broadband, and energy efficiency.
So they need to invest in those areas.
Definitely. They also acknowledge the limited investment in local research and development,
Oh, wow.
the lack of diversity in the AI field, and some fragmentation in national priorities.
So a bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah, but they're aware of the weaknesses, which is important.
Okay, now for the exciting part. What about the opportunities?
Well, they see a lot of potential in public-private partnerships,
Okay.
bringing together the government, businesses, and other stakeholders.
So leveraging everyone's strengths.
Exactly. They also want to invest more in the local innovation ecosystem,
Okay.
supporting startups, creating incubators, that kind of thing.
Right, nurturing that homegrown talent.
Definitely. They also see a need for open data repositories, making data more accessible for AI development. And they want to create AI models that are specific to Kenyan languages and contexts.
So really tailoring the technology to their needs.
Exactly. They also talk about embedding African values into AI design.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it's not just importing AI from other countries, it's about making sure it aligns with their own culture and ethics.
That makes sense.
And they want to leverage Kenya's leadership in renewable energy to power those data centers sustainably.
Okay, so thinking about the environmental impact as well.
Exactly. So a lot of promising opportunities on the horizon.
Okay, but what about the challenges? Every opportunity comes with its own set of challenges.
Oh, for sure. They're very realistic about that. One of the biggest concerns is job displacement.
Right, we talked about that earlier.
Yeah, AI could automate a lot of jobs, and they need to figure out how to manage that transition.
Okay.
They also worry about brain drain.
Okay, what's that?
It's when talented people leave the country to seek better opportunities elsewhere.
Oh, right. So they lose their best and brightest.
Exactly. And they're aware of the pressure from global regulations. Trying to comply with different rules from different countries can be difficult.
Yeah, especially for a developing country.
Yeah. And they're still quite dependent on foreign technology and data centers.
Okay,
They want to build up more local capacity.
makes sense.
Cybersecurity is a growing concern.
Right. AI can be used for good or bad.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of misinformation, which can spread like wildfire online.
Especially with these new generative AI tools.
Exactly. And finally, funding is always a challenge.
Right.
They need more investment in local AI initiatives.
So a mix of opportunities and challenges, as you said.
Yeah, it's a complex landscape.
Let's move on to the core of the strategy itself now.
Yeah.
What are the fundamental building blocks? What's it all based on?
Okay, so the strategy starts with a very clear and ambitious vision.
Okay, what is it?
They want to make Kenya Africa's leading AI hub
Okay.
for innovation, for development, for inclusion.
So it's not just about the tech itself, it's about how it's used.
Exactly. They want to drive sustainable development, economic growth, and social inclusion using AI.
Okay.
And they want to be recognized as a leader in AI research and application across the whole continent.
That's a bold vision.
It is very ambitious.
So how do they plan to achieve this vision? What's their strategy, their value proposition?
Right, so they have three main pillars that underpin their strategy.
Okay, what are they?
The first is ethical and responsible AI.
Okay.
They're not just chasing the shiny new tech, they're thinking about the ethical implications from the start.
Right, so it's not just about what they can do, but what they should do.
Exactly. The second pillar is data sovereignty and ethical data practices.
Okay, we talked about that earlier.
Yeah, it's about making sure they control their own data and that it's used ethically.
So avoiding those data colonialism scenarios.
Exactly. And the third pillar is a local-first approach.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means prioritizing local talent, local resources, and local solutions.
So building up their own AI ecosystem.
Yeah, but they're not closing themselves off to the world.
Huh.
They still want to collaborate internationally, but on their own terms.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it's about balancing local development with strategic partnerships.
So ethical AI, data sovereignty, and a local-first approach.
Yeah, those are the three pillars.
You also mentioned guiding principles, right?
They do, but the document doesn't go into detail about what those principles are.
Okay, so we'll have to keep an eye out for those.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they flesh those out.
Okay, so the vision and the values provide the framework. Now let's talk about the how. What are the concrete steps they're going to take? What are the key themes and sub-themes of their strategy?
Right, so they've identified several strategic themes that will guide their actions.
Okay, what are they?
One is AI digital infrastructure.
Okay, so the foundations.
Exactly. They need to build the infrastructure that will support AI development and deployment.
Right, like computing power, networks, all that stuff.
Exactly. Another theme is data.
Okay,
They need a robust data governance framework and access to high-quality data sets.
makes sense.
Then there's AI R&D and innovation.
So pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
Yeah, investing in research, supporting startups, developing new solutions.
Okay.
Talent development is a huge one.
Right, training the next generation of AI experts.
Exactly. They need to integrate AI education into schools and universities.
Yeah, starting young.
Definitely. Governance is another key theme.
So the policies, the regulations, the oversight.
Exactly. They need a legal framework that can adapt to the rapid pace of AI development.
Right, it's a moving target.
Yeah. Investments are obviously crucial.